Okay, let's make sure this works now. Yes. Okay. And that, let's just make sure that it would go backwards and forwards if I wanted it to. It would. Okay. And that's wonderful. Thanks for hanging in there with me. I'll delete the old one. Test in chat. Okay, what have you missed so far? That I'm wearing a really fun sweater, and that I'm drinking coffee from my Cal State San Marcos mug, and then you missed 6 minutes of me being a boomer who doesn't know how to use a computer. But now we're here, we're together. Good morning. Let's get it going. I hope you're all, just a couple announcements before we get into lecture. I hope you're all reading and enjoying wellness. Remember, this is a really fun and wonderful, great read, but it is a really big, chunky book. So just a gentle push to not let it become a source of stress when you feel that you are behind on the book. And the way that you do that is by getting ahead on reading the book. So some of you I know are doing super well and being really proactive about it. And I'd like to inspire all of you to do that. So read. Read. And I want to remind you that in addition to activity and office hours, that I'm happy to discuss your Unit 1 homework over email. I know that it can be easier for the folks who are in the in-person section to feel like they have access to me to improve upon that assignment and make it a great piece of work, but I just want to remind you that you all do, regardless of whether you come to activity or come to office hours. Now, the way that I like to do this, support you remotely, if you'd like support in addition to activity or office hours or instead of, is feel free to send me an outline or a draft or like a general topic and run it by me. And I'm more than happy to give written feedback. That works better for me than like sharing your screen while we're in office hours and like saying, tell me what you think. I like giving written feedback. It gives us a paper trail. It gives us something to work off. I can give you more nitty gritty comments. So if you'd like to go that route, know that you are able to. Anything else about that? I don't think so. What I've seen so far is great progress. Okay. Now, last week. Those of you who have been in person certainly know, but I think I've even mentioned it in lecture, that I'm a big Niners fan. I'm from the Bay. Grew up watching the Niners. Care about the Niners a lot. Faithful to the Bay. This and that. So instead of being really negative about it, I'll show you my health data from watching the Super Bowl. This is from my Aura ring, which I wear all the time. I'm not married. I just have to wear it on my ring finger. So they take my heart rate variability. This is something you can do also like on your phone. You can take your heart rate variability. Super interesting stuff. And that is a measure of stress. So they even like break it up. These are not super clinical thresholds or anything, but to make it more interpretable for the lay person, they have a restored, relaxed, engaged, and stressed heart rate variability, and they can map it. So we'll get them next year, Niners. And this is what I was feeling. So this is what, noon? This is probably when the game starts. And then this is overtime. This is how I was feeling during overtime. Yeah. So we'll get them next year. I made a soft promise to you to go over the quiz things that either people struggled with or seem to have difficulty with, or I just want to make sure we're on the same page, or if I messed it up, which this week I did. So this one, when systemic barriers that create inequities are removed, we have blank. I intended for this to be justice. If you said anything with justice, you got the points. Because I was trying to evoke the picture of the fence that we talked about at the beginning of the lecture and at the end of the lecture. If you put equity, you got half credit. I think that that's half correct. One of your classmates was like, can this at least be half correct? Or like, should this count? And I decided on half credit. So that's what you got if you put equity. Anything else? No. Um, and then this one, maybe it's because it was in a screenshot, but y'all struggled with this one. And you know what I think this is? They always say that lies are more believable or like include a lot of detail. I don't know if that was what got you there. But I said that historically, over half of US newspapers have represented that social inequalities and not individual behaviors are the main reason why racial and ethnic minorities get sicker and die sooner than the rest of the population. Now, where you can find the actual answer is here. For both causes and solutions, behavioral explanations dominated the discourse, followed by societal health care and genetic explanations. Only 4% of articles invoked a social justice rationale. So that's in direct contrast with this. Right? So that's where that's coming from, is this screenshot and article. So they're talking about the dominance of behavioral explanations. Okay, and then this one, I accidentally left like a fourth blank answer, and it wasn't selected as like a correct answer, but I imagine it was so confusing. Like some people clicked it, some people didn't click it, and then when after a few people had taken it, I did remove it, so then it was like grading differently. So because I accidentally left a blank option open, to be entirely fair, everyone gets this point. The correct answer is all three of these things, right? We talked about this last lecture. We talked about this last lecture as a manifestation of this. And we talked about this the first week. So the answer is all three, in case you see it in the future. Any questions about that? I'm going to make sure that stream is going off without a hitch. Just give me a moment. I also think I'm going to take down the video where I was messing up. Okay. Yeah, we are live. Do me a favor and chat if you are here. All right, not all at once now. Okay, back to lecture. Okay, just making sure that we were live. Last week, we went over disparities in life expectancy. These are them by race. We also talked about disaggregated data, that all of these can be broken down further. Jesse and Laezel, thank you for chatting. Thank you for chatting. Oh, I so appreciate that. Glad to know that we are live, in fact. But you can see who is not doing well in terms of life expectancy, and who is doing better. And again, these can be broken down into subpopulations, and we can get more specific and advocate for those subgroups as well. Also, last week we talked about maternal mortality and implicit bias, and I told you that we'd learn more about that this week, and we will. Basically, this article found that implicit bias from providers is most likely a contributing factor to the alarming racial health disparity of maternal mortality and morbidity in the US, which we talked about the magnitude of that disparity last week. So today, we'll be connecting that to the larger picture, and we'll be talking about racism as a fundamental cause of health. We'll also be talking about root causes and the role of policy. And these are all connected, right? So I know it's like a very wordy title, but we got a lot to go over. So, if you are in chat or if you're at home, quietly think to yourself, do you believe that healthcare should be a right? You can even reply to me if you feel so strongly about this. If we were in class, I would have you raise your hands if you believe that healthcare should be a right. Do you think that if folks are in need or in want of seeing a doctor and pursuing medical care and treatment for their ailments, that that should be a right? Now, expanding upon that, do you believe that health should be a right? Right, we've talked about medical treatment. And now in this class, because it's a public health oriented, epidemiology is a sect of public health, we're talking about prevention. Do you believe that good health should be a right? The things we need to pursue it in addition to healthcare. So, that's your food for thought as we consider today's lecture. Let's talk about a fundamental cause. We talked about this a little bit last week of there was the example of embodiment and discrimination and stress, where it was the college-aged women are smoking, and they're smoking because they're stressed, and they're stressed because of the patriarchy, and that is what the article found. So yes, smoking causes cancer, but what causes smoking? Stress, right? What causes stress? Inequitable conditions. So those are the sorts of things we're talking about when we talk about a fundamental cause. We can conflate these two terms. Just let's consider them to be the same thing. So root causes or fundamental causes are the underlying social, economic, and environmental factors that shape health disparities and health inequities. Again, do not tell me that a behavior is a root cause. It's not. You got to look at the cause of the behavior too. Yeah, this is just the formal definition. I'll leave that for you, but I will read the last sentence. The long-term impact of the fundamental cause can only be eliminated by reducing inequalities in the flexible resources. So if you are thinking that healthcare should be a right, hopefully this is connecting the dots for you. This first bit is going to be a little bit glossary-like, but we'll get through it. The next term is social disadvantage, which refers to the unfavorable social, economic, or political conditions that some groups of people systematically experience based on their relative position in social hierarchies, and means restricted ability to participate fully in society and enjoy the benefits of progress. Now, this is a component of this definition that I'd like you to remember, and it's different from unavoidable physical advantage or disadvantage. Oh, one of your TAs is really meowing. And racism. It's in the title. We should define it. Racism is prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism by an individual, community, or institution against a person or people on the basis of their membership in a particular racial or ethnic group, typically one that is a minority or marginalized. I'd say always one that is a minority or marginalized. This is why reverse racism, quote unquote, doesn't exist, right? In a white supremacist, race-conscious society, white people are not marginalized. Therefore, reverse racism is not an impactful thing. Okay. Let's go over some other operational definitions. The first being oppression. Oppression is the systematic mistreatment, subjugation, or unjust exercise of power and control by dominant groups or structures over marginalized or vulnerable peoples, right? Involving the denial of rights, opportunities, resources, and dignity to certain individuals or communities based on social, economic, political, or cultural factors. Here's a great quote. If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. And that's what we're talking about here. Privilege. Okay, this is on your quiz, so let's get on the same page about this. Privilege is unearned advantages, benefits, or favorable treatments that individuals or groups receive based on their social identity, such as race, gender, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, or ability, often unseen and perpetuated through institutional practices, policies, and cultural norms, reinforcing unequal power dynamics. If you want a reading about this. This is talking specifically about white privilege, which I think is the most salient form of privilege. When you are confronted with privilege, those of you who possess white privilege, which means those of you that are white and living in America. Privilege I don't bring to your attention to inspire denial or guilt. I bring this to your attention for you to acknowledge and take action, however you see fit. If you have trouble confronting this or want to learn more about privilege and how it operates, it's a little bit dated, but Peggy McIntosh is a white lady, and I think like this is a good introductory piece of work. I could add it to your module. Basically saying that privilege is an invisible knapsack of things that you get just for being white. Oh, one of your TAs is going to break in. Come here. Where was I? Oh, yeah. And I'd like to emphasize that privileges are unearned. Unearned. When a privilege is universally conferred, what do we call that? When a privilege is universally conferred, it becomes a right. When every single person has access to something, whether it is safe movement, whether it is medical care, say hello to your TA, then it is a right. Then it's conferred positively as a right. So things like healthcare, they operate as privileges. Education operates as a privilege, right? And that's, again, privilege is not something that you should need to denounce, but be aware of, acknowledge, and take whatever action you see fit. The other thing I will talk about just explicitly is, I guess in line with when a privilege is universally conferred, it operates as a right. The goal is not to give people more privilege. In that sense, they are using privilege to mean power, and I don't think that's correct. Given this operational definition, that's not. People and populations are not getting sicker because they are underprivileged, right? Again, because these are unearned. They're getting sicker because they are exploited, because they are underserved, because they lack those resources. So, just to be 100 about that. Underprivileged is not a word I'd like to see you use in your papers. Questions about that, feel free to pipe in. I understand that might be a new idea for some of you. Hi, Milo. This is Milo, everyone. Okay, we've talked about this a little bit before, but let's be explicit about this idea as well. The social construction of race posits that race is not a biological or natural phenomenon. I know that people have different alleles and genetically have different amounts of melanin and different physical manifestations of their genetics. But rather, race, as we consider it, is a social and cultural construct. Race and the categories that we use to define race have no biological basis, and there is greater genetic variation within so-called racial groups than between them. And again, race is the product of these things: social stratification, colonialism, imperialism, racism. That racial categories have been used to justify the subjugation and exploitation of colonized peoples, and that's still the case. Okay, in contrast, here is the idea of post-racism or a post-racial America. This is a theoretical environment in which the United States is free from racial preference, discrimination, and prejudice, or colorblindness. These are the folks who say, oh, a black man was president, so the legacy of racism or racism is over. These are the people who claim to be colorblind and say, I don't care if you're brown, black, blue, or purple. So do you still think, given everything that we've learned so far in the semester, that we still live in a racialized society? Or do you tend to believe the post-racism? Hi! You gotta hug a TA. You gotta hug a TA. I'd argue that yes, we live in a racialized society, but you can be critical of this post-racial thought. Now, anti-racism. If you were engaged in May of 2020, this is probably a term you've heard before. But let's define it and think about it in a classroom setting. It's a concept and movement that seeks to actively identify, challenge, and change attitudes, behaviors, policies, and practices that perpetuate racism and racial inequality, right? Since America is a racialized society, or at least we're believing that based on what we've seen in health disparities and how they manifest, it is not enough to be not racist. Just like with that Desmond Tutu quote, if you are neutral, the oppression goes on. We have to be anti-racist. We have to actively counter those systems in order to undo them. So that's the idea. Think about if that's something your values align with, especially if you were one of the people that said healthcare or health should be a right. It operates as a privilege, and for who, and what would need to be done to undo that and confer that to all people as a right. Now, implicit bias. I gotta shut my door. We talked about it last week, but a bias is a pre-programmed tendency. This is just interpersonal bias. We'll talk about bias in research later on. Pre-programmed tendencies that cause us to perceive and interpret things from a non-neutral point of view. And these can be either explicit or implicit. We're more interested in, because of what we learned about maternal mortality, and changing implicit bias, which is unfortunately much harder. Can you define what a racialized society is again, please? Yes. This is the opposite of post-racial America. So, post-racialized America, right, is that in some regards, people are treated differently upon their race. People argue that oftentimes that we are past that. And I would like to point out what we've learned in the first few weeks about the enduring health disparities in America. How the social determinants of health have influenced those. So a racialized society is where we are conscious of race. Does that make sense? Back to bias. Two types of bias are explicit and implicit. Explicit bias is biases you're able to recognize, analyze, and self-correct if necessary as they occur. It's when you find yourself sitting in a talk and thinking, oh, I'm really listening to that person because they're dressed very nicely. Or, oh, this advertising is really successful because this person looks like me. Explicit biases like that. Versus implicit biases. These are biases that manifest automatically without conscious intent or awareness. There's a whole bunch of cognitive shit going on about how you respond to stimuli that implicit biases like subvert. And they may not be aligned with and can even be contrary to your conscious beliefs. You can say with your chest, hey, I'm anti-racist, but because of how society conditions folks, you may still carry implicit biases when you meet different people. And just because they're unconscious doesn't mean you're powerless to them. We'll talk about possible ways or questions you can run through to think about that. You may be thinking, are implicit biases really so common? You might have heard of the resume studies. The resume studies are sociologists ran studies where they prepared the same resume with the same qualifications. And for some of them at the top, they put white sounding names. So they put John Smith. And with the same resume, with the same qualifications, they would put African American sounding names. So they would put like Jamal Williams, right? They sent out all these resumes. The ones with the white sounding names, despite having no difference in qualifications, got one callback for every 10 resumes. So like a 10% success rate. Versus the ones with the African American sounding names got one callback per 15 resumes. So on the employer side, They haven't even interviewed the person, haven't even met them, but they have biases about those names and the person tied to those names and their qualifications and their job preparedness. Right? So that's still salient on the job market. Another resume study is that both male and female faculty members rate male applicants as more competent and more hireable, and they would offer them more mentoring and a 15% higher starting salary. Again, even with the same qualifications. When we're talking about unearned advantages, this is how those get conferred and start, right? And if you're hearing this and you are in the group that's getting shorted, this is something you should take into account, that you will have to better advocate for yourself when you get onto the job market. And it isn't always race and ethnicity, it's also body size. Height is a common one, but also like largeness and weight manifests as well in implicit biases in hiring. But the common one is that CEO height. The average height of a male in the United States is 5'9", but the average height of a Fortune 500 CEO is 6 feet tall. Is that we conflate. Usually the bias is that tall people are more successful and more competent and better leaders, right? So I personally think that it's short king spring, but the Fortune 500 CEOs don't agree. So again, last week we talked about how implicit bias, yes, can neuter your job prospects on the employer side, employer biases, but we can also look at how provider biases cause premature death and cause disparities on the lines of race. And that is a huge disgrace to reproductive health. And if you think health should be a right, what needs to change here? And if you're still a doubter, again, I'm not saying that these providers are racist. I'm saying that we all carry implicit biases. It's unusual that people would really consciously believe that race, gender, and body type affect job performance or worthiness to receive medical care in the most previous instance. More likely, people are unconsciously influenced by stereotypes and biases. Again, that's not to say that we should throw up our hands and give up. Now, you can assess your own implicit bias. I have this linked in the module 2, but there are implicit bias tests, and you can pick different ones. Usually binary. This race one, they have you pretty much associate positive and negative words with two different groupings and see how quickly you can do it, and your reaction time and correctness to it reveals your biases. So if you're interested, take these and kind of unpack them, think about them. If you get like, oh, I was perfectly neutral, you know, this is not a green light that you've passed the racism test. This is something for you to be conscious of and be conscious of your biases. That just uncovers how you are doing today, right? There's also super interesting ones, like this gender and science one. I ended up getting that women are more associated with science and men are more associated with liberal arts, which is not what you typically think. But my dad is a lawyer and my sister is a computer scientist. So I was like, oh, that totally revealed my bias in a way that I definitely hadn't consciously thought of. I assumed that I would be the other way and be like, oh yeah, men are associated with STEM. But I didn't carry that bias. So some of these, figure out where you are. At your own leisure, assess your implicit biases, and if you discover that you have some. Mindfulness and conscious debiasing. There are a lot of strategies, and like, certain HR workplaces will train you to do this. Sometimes medical schools, if they're really woke, they'll have you take the implicit bias tests and like write about them. But just some strategies you can use are to ask yourself, what factors am I considering about people? What factors have I left out? Do the factors that I'm deciding upon deserve their importance? Am I being influenced by a template? right? This is some shit. If there are archaic rubrics or curricula given to you that are being used for you to evaluate students or evaluate your peers or hire new coworkers, are those things truly anti-racist? You can ask, how am I being influenced by my personal experiences, right? Like for the gender and science one, I was able to connect that, oh, it's because of my dad's profession and my sister's profession that I was influenced by personal experiences, and that created a bias. Are those experiences common is a good one. And how might someone else view this? A great way to just check yourself on implicit bias is to step outside yourself and consider other truths. And another way to do this is through finding counterexamples. A really common bias, and unfortunately it is very true on a normal societal level, that you need a college degree to be successful, but you don't need one. Is there a correlation? Yes. Finding counterexamples can help you debias from that. Do you need a college degree to be successful? No. Counterexamples include Oprah, Maya Angelou, and Mark Zuckerberg, and Bill Gates. All very, whatever you consider your metric of success to be, these are household names that we know at the top of their game. So none of those people have a college degree. And then replace your stereotypes. You can recognize when something conforms to a stereotype, label it, and try and actively substitute a non-stereotype example. A great one that I wrote about when I was in college for an ecofeminism class was Black Panther. So that in Black Panther, like the tech CEO in that is the black little sister. So if you have a stereotype of what tech people look like, label that. Yeah, I carry a stereotype that tech people are white men in Patagonias, and then actively substitute a non-stereotype example. What a wonderful representation of a woman of color in a tech position and in a leadership role. So there you go. There's finding counterexamples and replacing your stereotypes. We'll go over a few theories. Really the most dense one we'll go over is critical race theory, and then we'll briefly go over intersectionality and weathering, okay? So critical race theory. What is critical race theory? Oh. The screenshot got a little scuffed, but that's okay. Feel free to look up this paper. I think, reference it in another slide. Just putting that out for you. Critical race theory is an emerging transdisciplinary race equity methodology that originated in legal studies and is grounded in social justice, which we learned what that is last week. And it gives us tools for conducting research and practice to challenge racial hierarchies that we see in a racialized society. Now, people are concerned about critical race theory. The Floridians are mad. Here are a myriad of reasons just from my experience that people are concerned about critical race theory. The first is misunderstanding, thinking that it perpetuates negative stereotypes. If you know the gun girl from Kent State who now does YouTube videos about being a libertarian or whatever, there's one where she's talking to students at Rutgers University and they're trying to tell her about systemic racism and the legacy of racism on the campus. And she says to them, the only people I see putting down black folks is you. When we've just learned about anti-racism, right? We understand that we live in a racialized society. We understand that people of color die sooner and that the social determinants of health fuel that, right? And we understand that as anti-racists, if you're aligned with that value, that one would have to consciously name and unpack and undo the systems that are causing that. And that if we don't, then we are taking the side of the oppressor. So that's a misunderstanding, is that the naming these things is like, oh, we're continuously putting people of color down. That is a misunderstanding about critical race theory. Only by naming these things and unpacking them can we undo them, right? The goal is equitable treatment. Second is a perceived threat to traditional values. People just want to see people pull themselves up by their bootstraps, but this is a whether or not you think that's possible, I'll leave up to you. Fear of indoctrination, again, my goal is to give you the language and give you the tools to think about these things and apply your own values. I don't need you to be anti-racist if you're not trying to be. Political polarization, I think that's self-inflicted. Concerns about age appropriateness. I think that this is kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy where then if you're like, oh, this isn't age appropriate, then we can't develop good age appropriate materials for children. There are some great children's books that talk about race in a sensitive way without bringing up the sad and violent truths of how that manifests. A lot of the critical race theory things that target children are just social and emotional learning and communication skills. To try and not begin the conditioning that leads us to live in a racialized society. Zero-sum thinking about racial progress. That it's like, oh, if people of color start doing well, that means that white folks have to start doing worse, and that's not true. This is one that really strikes fear. A rising tide can lift all ships. Scarcity is a bit of a myth and has people clutching to their pearls to maintain these power systems. But in fact, there is enough to go around. Discomfort when talking about race and racism. This shit is hard to think about. Again, like I said with privilege, is thinking about race and racism, the inspiration is not to inspire white guilt or white denial. It is to be able to acknowledge and take action. Whether that's just bringing it up at the Thanksgiving dinner table when it comes up in your family, or if it's going out there and doing advocacy, engaging and doing community engaged public health research for the rest of your life. All valid actions. But yeah, it's not supposed to be comfortable. It's a super uncomfortable thing. And it is a privilege to only have to engage with it when you want to. And concerns over academic freedom and curriculum control. I'm not like a large-scale educational researcher, so I'm just doing this within the scope of my class, right? And giving you the skills and the tools to talk about this. So let's talk about the four main features. Number one is race consciousness. This is what I mean by a racialized society too. Is explicit acknowledgement of the workings of race and racism in the social context or in one's personal life. The US is a racialized society, like we said before. We gotta be conscious of it. The second feature is contemporary orientation. This is because folks were like, well, slavery's over and Obama was president, so black people are fine. So the second feature, therefore, is reflection on the aspects of racialization that are contemporarily salient. People are like, right now this is a lot of looking at police violence, because that is contemporarily salient. But yeah, an application is the structural mechanisms continue to have the greatest impacts, even though contemporary racism is characterized by its subtlety and ordinariness. The third feature is centering in the margins rather than in the mainstream. This means making perspectives of socially marginalized groups rather than those of people belonging to a dominant race or culture, the central axis around which discourse on a topic revolves. Last week when we talked about maternal mortality, I brought up a news article written by Allison Felix. She has that lived experience as a black woman dealing with reproductive harm. I'm not. That's an example of centering in the margins. Uplifting those own voices' lived experience and being intentional as to who can claim what lived experience. We see this a little bit as an issue in public health scholarship, right? Of, in America, yes, but more so in global research. The helicopter researchers who come in, swoop down on a population, take their data, get their papers, and don't benefit the community, and often don't have a lived experience within that community. So there definitely is sort of a grassroots initiative to give more researchers that represent the populations that they're researching funding to do their work versus letting the white folks tell us what our priorities need to be in terms of health equity. So just a thought. And then finally, praxis. This is hard to understand, but it's really like all the things meshed together in practice in life. It's an iterative process by which the knowledge gained from theory, research, personal experiences, and practice inform one another. This is like keep growing, keep learning, keep being reflective. Don't just take this article that was written in 2010 as like the end all be all, right? We learn more by practicing, reflecting, building. From this paper, this is the paper that all of this came from, so please feel free to reference this more if you're curious about it. I won't hold you to anything beyond those 4 and these words, but here's your glossary. If you want to use any of these terms in your Unit 1 homework. There you go. The next theory. Now, it was quite strange because we haven't talked about the weathering hypothesis yet. The answer to one of the quiz questions last week was the minority stress model. And I think I did use, like, specifically minority stress or something like that in the question. But a few people put the weathering hypothesis, despite the fact that we hadn't learned it yet. So I'm a little bit curious if you've learned that in another course or what's up. I only have one slide on it. There is a reading on it. One of your readings is about it. The one by Geronimus and colleagues. But really, I just want you to know what it is. It's that chronic exposure to social and economic disadvantage leads to accelerated decline in physical health outcomes and could partially explain racial disparities in a wide array of health outcomes. And that this occurs epigenetically over generations. It is a hypothesis. Again, we haven't proved this. But the evidence is mounting that something like this is true. Like I said, in line with the social construction of race, the NIH loves to fund things that get people to do genetic research to try and find the gene that makes black folks die sooner. And they'll keep searching because more likely than not, it's something like the weathering hypothesis. And there really is shit with like telomere shortening that they're looking at now in line with these exposures. Whether this chronic exposure to social and economic disadvantage causes telomere shortening. So, that's nascent research for you. The next theory is probably the one you're most likely to have heard of, and it's the idea of intersectionality. It is also a theory that you can use like other theories like ecosocial theory and apply to research studies, so that's super cool. But intersectionality, in case you haven't heard of it, is a theoretical framework for understanding how aspects of a person's social and political identities combine to create different modes of discrimination and privilege, right? It's both. And it was first coined by legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw, that's her, in 1989. This TED Talk is linked in your module. If this is a new concept to you, I urge you to go watch it. She talks about how the marginalization of women and the marginalization of black folks intersect to produce more negative outcomes for black women, and how those negative experiences get dismissed or swept under the rug more often. So that's the idea of intersectionality. A Gardener's Tale. If you are to read, go read all your readings. I know I just posted them, so I don't expect you to have read them by now. That's on me. I populated the module with all the readings, and then I forgot to publish the module, so I understand that you probably haven't done the reading. The first one that you should do should be this. Should be A Gardener's Tale. This is a, it's an old paper. It's from 2000, but I think if you're a fan of extended metaphor, this is a great way to learn about different forms of racism and the role of policy. Okay. The 3 types. The first they talk about is institutionalized racism. that manifests itself both in material conditions and in access to power. Now, in the lore, in the story, they talk about how I think it's like one of the flowers gets plastic pots, and one of the flowers gets a clay pot. One of the flowers, they get they get dry soil, nutrient poor soil, and the other flowers, they get nutrient rich soil. I think it's that, like, yeah, in the story it's these red flowers that they get the nutrient rich soil so the flowers look beautiful, and that the pink flowers are in a plastic pot and they get nutrient dry soil and are not watered, right? So that these flowers do better. And that's a metaphor for material conditions. Differential access to quality education. How much are you able to get a good start? Sound housing. How much are you able to put down your roots? Gainful employment. How much are you able to grow? Appropriate medical facilities. They also talk about the little bugs on the flowers, so that's your metaphor. In a clean environment, if you're in the sun. And then access to power. Differential access to information, including one's own history, right? We still deal with the legacy of diaspora and colonization and how your ancestors lived and died and were able to tell their stories or not, right? Resources including wealth and organizational infrastructure, which is founded on all this stuff too, right? And voice, including voting rights. I've got thoughts about this that go beyond the scope of this class. Representation in government and control of the media. Seat at the table does matter. In terms of identity and also the values that you hold. So, institutional racism, that's the metaphor. And again, unearned privilege, a bit of a redundancy, but there you go. And the metaphor with the flowers. Now, that's the first type. We've talked about it a lot in this course. The second type is personally mediated racism. This is what most people think of when they hear racism. This is when the Karens throw up their hands and they're like, oh, you're telling me that I have white privilege, but I'm not racist. I've never said anything. I would never tell someone something like that. So this is what people think of. They think of prejudice and discrimination. They think of differential assumptions about the abilities, motives, and intentions of others according to their race, or differential actions toward those according to their race. And folks are like, well, I would never treat Black folks differently. I see all as the same. And we've learned about what that is, right? So, the example here is that since the little pink flowers aren't doing so good, that they get plucked. Someone plucks some of them. And then the third form is internalized racism. This is for members of whatever that community is. It is defined as acceptance by members of the stigmatized races of negative messages about their own abilities and intrinsic worth. Now, if you go back to this paper and you read it, and this is something that you relate to, I really feel for you. On an emotional level, I really feel for you. It can be staggering to have this be named. If you have felt this and haven't had it described to you before. Just my tenderness. And internalized racism is characterized by their not believing in others who look like them and not believing in themselves. And includes accepting limitations to one's own full humanity, including one's spectrum of dreams, one's right to self-determination, and one's range of allowable self-expression. It manifests as an embracing of whiteness, self-devaluation, and resignation, helplessness, and hopelessness. Yeah, and this reflects system of privilege, societal values, Western beauty standards, erodes an individual's sense of value, and undermines collective action. Right? If you are willing to, because of internalized racism, let go of important aspects of a beautiful culture to cater to the white folks. That is a big result of that. So here, the pink flowers are trying to look more like the red flowers. and wanting to be like them. So, that's internalized racism. Now, at this point, you're asking, like, oh, the soil seems to have mattered a lot. The, who was plucking out the pink flowers seems to have mattered a lot. Who made that decision? Who set up those foundations? For which flowers were able to flourish and which flowers were not. The gardener represents the government. I have a cat that's very needy. Come here. Sorry, I never close my bedroom door, so the cats are like very confused. The gardener represents the government. They were the ones with the power to decide, the power to act, and the control of the resources. They were the ones that initially chose which flowers would go into which pot, which flowers received which soil. Plucked off the flowers that weren't looking as good. Gardening can be a wonderful thing. And again, allocation of resources, we've talked about the importance of that. But they can be dangerous when aligned with one group. Right? When that choice is made a priori. That I want these red flowers to look nicer and do better. And not concerned with equity. So, again, I know you probably haven't read it because I did just post the readings, but do a little self-reflection to yourself about how that reading made you feel. Now, neighborhoods and health. I think we've touched on this idea before. But if not, let's talk about it now. Is that of redlining. If you've taken other sociology or like race in America classes, hopefully you've heard about it. But yes, we'll talk about it now in epidemiology as a racist manifestation that has caused health disparities now. So, redlining is the practice of marking red lines on maps to designate neighborhoods considered to be high risk or undesirable for investment. And what this really was is so you can see like where they would demarcate different neighborhoods worthwhile for investment. Of like, if you lived in one of these areas, you were less likely to get a bank loan or be able to buy a house. And you may be wondering, what are people using to decide which of these neighborhoods are high risk or undesirable? They were using race. In practices, it was a systematic process employed by banks, mortgage lenders, and insurance companies to deny or limit access to financial services such as loans, mortgages, or insurance policies to certain neighborhoods or communities based on racial or ethnic grounds. Again, we've talked about the importance of neighborhoods last week of like looking at census tracts. A lot of those life expectancies and disparities in census tract were galvanized or created by redlining. Again, you could live in a community of other people of color and have had all cultural power and be gaining social capital. And then a policy like this comes in and neuters the entire economic growth for your community. When you go all the way back to that slide about social disadvantage, there is whatever that blurb is highlighted in blue that I told you to remember. Let's see if we can jump to it really quick. Here. Restricted ability to participate fully in society and enjoy the benefits of progress. Neuters their economic growth. No benefits of progress, right? And it's on your quiz to define redlining. So you gotta use one of these two things, right? Just to be explicit. And this happened in like, they ended it in the 70s, but we still saw it in practice through the mid 70s. And you may say, well, that 70s was a long time ago. Why do we care? This article came out 2022. Historical redlining is associated with fossil fuel power plant siting and present day inequalities in air pollutant emissions. It's living on the east side and it's redlining. By design, and this is current. So one negative consequence is inequitable exposure to air pollutants. Now we're connecting back to health, right? More black adults have asthma as a result of historical redlining, among other things. The racist practice of historical redlining profoundly contributes to long-term environmental and asthma-related inequities in black adults. Black children got lead poisoning. This is from a review about how public policies, including redlining, created these consequences that exposed black children to neurodevelopmental consequences, including lead poisoning. And that can be dealt with, of course, on the redlining side, but also on the health protection side. And this is a paper by my friend, my colleague. One of you is writing about asthma inequities in black children. I told you my friend who's a respiratory therapist. He's on this paper. He's the author of this paper. And you'll read it in Unit 3. So we'll come back to this. But redlining, residents in a red line census tract was associated with 9% decreased odds of having pharmacy access within 1 mile. That's access to medical treatment at a base level. Doesn't even matter the specific health treatment you're trying to treat. If you need access to medication, it's structurally more difficult for you because you live in a census tract that was redlined. Right, so still, redlining determines a lot of health disparities. And gentrification. We gotta define this too. I live in, it's such a bummer too because I talk my talk constantly about making neighborhoods more walkable and car-centric society and stuff, and that often gets inflated with gentrification. Is that cities are like, oh, well, if you want me to put more money into an area and make it more walkable, then now it's going to get gentrified. Then the housing costs have to go up and it's going to get gentrified. So the definition of this is an urban development process where a previously low income or underdeveloped neighborhood undergoes economic and demographic changes, typically resulting in the displacement of earlier, usually poorer residents. And that forces displacement, direct through eviction, foreclosure, or inability to afford rising rents. The rent is too damn high. Or indirect due to a perceived loss of community identity and belonging. And this is a sign that says, now that the neighborhood is nice, why do I have to move? And that's a consequence of gentrification. Now, that's all the new material for you today. But I asked you at the beginning of the lecture, do you believe that health care should be a right? Do you believe that health should be a right? Learning what you've learned over the past few weeks. What changes need to be made? What resources need to be conferred for health care or health to be assured as a right? And that's just food for your thought. Now coming up, quiz 3 is live now. I'm trying to make them be live before the lecture so that you can do them while I'm lecturing. And like potentially ask, you're not supposed to ask explicit questions. It's supposed to be individual work, but ask any clarifying questions while I'm still here with you. So go ahead and take that quiz before Thursday. And feel free to bring a copy of your Unit 1 homework, whatever state it's in, to activity on Thursday for workshopping. I don't know how we'll do this formally yet, but the goal is to have peer workshops, and I'll look at some of yours. those of you who are coming to activity. So let's do the Wordle and the connections. I know that this was a heavy lecture, a lot of slides, a lot of material, a lot of big picture concepts, but I'm here for your questions. I have a cat in my lap too, sorry if I'm sitting very strangely. Let's go ahead and do the Wordle. Okay, I've closed the ad. Let's have our starting word today be plants, because we talked about that. Yeah, we have a chat that says, no wonder plants grow more beautiful when people talk nice to them. What a great way to extend that metaphor. Yeah, it's whoever gets more positive treatment by that gardener, right? Plants, we have the A. Let's guess. Let's guess dream. Ooh, interesting. Are we allowed to open the quiz up and close it and come back at a later time, or does it have to be completed once opened? There's not a time limit, but I think... So you could, like, shut your computer or put your computer to sleep, I believe. But I don't allow multiple attempts. So I do think that you can close it and come back to it at a later time. I'm not 100% sure. There isn't a time limit, though. So I think if you leave the window open, it shouldn't kick you out or anything. I wonder if it's RAM. Or could it start with R? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Let's guess scram. Okay, got it. Got it in 3. I would never tell you to scram. Okay, let's do the connections real quick. My other friend got the Wordle in 3 as well, so. What a good day for me. Ooh, interesting. We've got produce, orange, egg, figure, steady, meatball, dairy, fish, mozzarella, goad, banana, snack, spur, frozen, jawbreaker, urge. Sections of a grocery store. This is gonna be one. Or maybe the snack aisle. Hey, kitty. It's either gonna be fish or snack. Like sections of the grocery store will definitely be one, and I see produce, frozen, and dairy. Goad is urge, spur, and like it's usually like motivate someone. Maybe egg someone on? I think this is it. Egg someone on. Urge someone, goad someone, spur someone. Yeah, encourage with on. Exactly. Exactly. Hey. Okay. So, again, we were thinking produce, dairy, frozen. And then I think this is going to be go. Go steady, go bananas, go figure. Go fish. That's what it is. And then produce, dairy, frozen, snack. These are the aisles. And then this. What could these be? Spheres? Edible spheres? Like you ever have mozzarella balls? Spherical foods, yep. All right. Thanks for staying for puzzles. I'm here for questions should you need them. Yeah, thanks also for putting up with the technical difficulties. And I'm available over email, or else I'll see you on Thursday, or else I'll see you next week. Good luck on your quiz.